Hey guys, welcome to Unit 2. This is going to be the first lecture of Unit 2. We're going to be covering the Roman Republic. The next lecture will be over the Roman Empire, and then some of the other lectures will be on Roman culture, Roman society, and then we'll also hopefully have a cool one near the end, and I'll tell you about that one later. So we're going to begin with the Roman Republic today, and we're going to go back kind of to the founding of Rome, and even a little bit before that. So let's begin and talk about the beginnings of Rome, how Rome came to be spread across, like Roman culture came to be spread across the Mediterranean, what was the Roman Republic like, and so forth. So let's go ahead and begin. If you've ever worked in the food service industry, you've definitely heard this phrase, and the phrase is location, location, location. The idea behind this phrase is that restaurants, one of the most important qualities of a restaurant is where it's located. You know, you want a restaurant to be on a well-traveled road or like a highway, easy to access, right on those little feeder roads on the highway, or maybe at like a busy intersection, you know, maybe near the center of a city or at least a well-populated area, you know, because you want a lot of people to be able to come in and eat the food, right? So restaurants, you know, they always say location, location, location is the most important thing for a restaurant. And in many ways, that's also the case for the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was incredibly well situated, or at least Rome itself is incredibly well situated. So Alexander the Great's empire did not extend west so much as it extended east, right? We talked a lot last time in the last unit about Alexander the Great's empire and how it went far east, right, into what is modern-day Afghanistan and modern-day India. Whereas the Greeks spread west, their culture spread west, but the empire did not sink its teeth into the west as much. So what ended up happening is the peninsula, the Italian peninsula, had Greek city-states in it, but those Greek city-states weren't as dominated by Alexander the Great's empire. So they retained a little bit of political independence. They were part of this broader kind of Hellenistic world, though. They still had, you know, the Greek language, Greek art, Greek philosophy. So like those strappings of Greek culture transferred over to the Italian peninsula. So there was this blend of Greek culture with the pre-existing cultures in Italy already, and we'll talk about some of those here in a minute. Plus, another reason why the location is so important for Italy is that it is right in the center of the Mediterranean. It is, you know, a critical juncture if you're trying to go from the eastern part of the Mediterranean, close to like Turkey and Greece, all the way over to the western Mediterranean of, you know, Spain and those places. So physical geography is very important. And not only that, but Italy is a peninsula. It's a key strategic location militarily for trade routes. So on the entire peninsula, you have all this great access to the Mediterranean Sea here, and the Adriatic Sea, of course, right here. But this big Mediterranean Sea, Italy is just very well placed to be like right at the center of that. Additionally, another thing that marks Italy in a similar sort of way to ancient Greece is mountain ranges. So you have two key mountain ranges in Italy. You got this one up here in the north, which is the Alps. The Alps provide kind of a natural barrier for the Italians, the people who are living on that peninsula, because it kind of blocks it off. So people aren't invading from the north very often. And then the Apennines run right here, right along the center of the Italian boot right there. They cut off access to the east. You can see that on this eastern seaboard right here, that there's not a lot of space, but there is quite a bit of space over here. So that means that Italy, because there's not as much space over here in the eastern portion, their eyes are going to be focused westward towards Spain and Carthage. These mountains did not carve up the peninsula in the way that happened to Greece, right? If you remember, the Greeks were kind of separated from each other because the mountain ranges kind of carved up Greece into kind of quadrants, which led to a lot of political disunity. Those city-states kind of developed by themselves in a way, and so they each developed like their own culture and their own kind of way of doing things. Whereas in Italy, you're going to get more political unity because these civilizations that are going to crop up are, closer together. They're often in the same sort of areas, and they're not as divided by the geography as the Greeks were. This area right here, these western plains of the Latium and the Campania areas, these are where the early civilizations are going to develop, and they're very well protected, right? Because you've got the Alps are up here, kind of protecting them from the north, and then the Apennines right here, kind of protecting them from the east. And so people are going to settle in this region right here that is a fertile area, good for growing crops. Rome in particular is right here in the middle of the map, and it is located on the banks of the Tiber River, which gave it access to fresh water. This area right here, where Rome is located, is the plain of Latium. So that's the area I was talking about a second ago, where there's this kind of fertile area, good for growing crops. It's located at a good river crossing. So the reason why Rome is not out here on the ocean, it's actually about 17 miles away from the ocean, is because this area right here there was a good river crossing right there. So Rome kind of is situated at this key juncture between southern Italy down here, the foot of the boot, and then the northern part of Italy. So Rome kind of occupies this key strategic location, both for trade, for military purposes, and it is very hilly around the area of Rome. And so there's a little bit of defense structure there. There's no mountain ranges nearby, so you can't, you can't fire down into Rome, so to speak. But Rome itself has its own defense structures through the hills in the area. Like I said, it's about 17 miles away from the coast, but it's pretty close. And the river, of course, runs to the coastline, so it's pretty easy to get goods from Rome to the coastline. So Rome is in a really good strategic location, and that's why people are going to start settling there pretty quickly. Now, before the Romans dominated the Italian peninsula, there was actually an earlier civilization that was kind of the dominant force in Italy, and those people were called the Etruscans. The Etruscans were the early Romans, so to speak. They developed their civilization roughly around 800 BCE. That was when they became the dominant group in the Italian peninsula. They'd been there for far longer, though. Most likely, historians, anthropologists date Etruscan arrival to roughly around 3000 BCE. Most archaeologists and anthropologists believe that the Etruscans came from Turkey, probably, again, about 3000 BCE, and then gradually built up their civilization in this area right here. You can see this area called Etruria, which is this kind of pea green shape here area, and then there's a little bit of an expansion right here, and you can see Rome is right here under the control of the Etruscans. And so the Etruscans and the Romans very much knew each other and were frequently at war with one another. So one of the interesting things about the Etruscans is that we don't know a great deal about their culture because a lot of their writings didn't survive. They wrote things down on linen cloth, which of course eroded over time. So what little we do know about them is from archaeological digs. Some of their writing does appear on stone tablets. We know that they had cities. We do know they had literature. We know they had extensive trade networks, as you can see by all the different cities that are located within the greater Etruria area. We know they warred with the Romans quite frequently and the other groups that were kind of surrounding them. We also know that the Etruscans influenced Roman culture heavily because the Etruscans had their own language, but they adopted the Greek alphabet. And then the Romans, when they became the big civilization on the Italian peninsula, they actually adopted the Etruscan alphabet. So if you think about it, it goes from Greece to the Etruscans and then to the Romans. So everything kind of goes back to that original Greek alphabet. They influenced Rome a great deal, both not just with language, but also with symbols, right? And I'll kind of give some examples of some of those symbols here in a minute. So the Etruscans are kind of the early civilization, but they will soon be overtaken by the Romans. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happened. So let's talk about the importance of myth and kind of the founding of Rome. How does Rome get founded, and why are myths and legends so important for the Roman people? So we know that the Romans, as a culture, settled in that Tiber River area roughly around 1000 BCE. This is the early Iron Age. And again, archaeologists have dug up a great deal about early Roman culture. So we know that they settled into that hilly region around the Tiber River roughly around 1000 BCE. But Romans created a number of myths about their own origins. Sometimes these myths blend actual history, and then it becomes kind of like legend, right? So like it's like the that the tall tale of the fishing trip where you catch something that's really just 6 inches long, and then by the end of the fishing trip, after you've told everybody about it, it's like you caught this whopper, right? That's like feet long. Same thing is happening with Roman culture, right? They will blend elements of reality, of real history, with legend and myth in an effort to kind of like make these tales. A better way to put it, I think, would be that Roman historians were more concerned with good stories rather than like dates and facts, right? A lot of the myths that we're going to talk about here have morals to them, right? There are lessons that you can kind of take away from it, and they really do a good job of revealing the qualities that Romans valued. So let me give you an example with the founding of Rome, because it will reveal like the ethics and the morals and the ideals of Rome itself. So the foundational myth of Rome involves two twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus, they're twins. They were the twin sons of Mars, the god of war, and Rhea Silvia, who was a descendant of Aeneas, who was a Trojan from the Trojan, or a person from Troy from the Trojan War. Aeneas is from the Iliad, and so these guys are kind of like Romulus and Remus are like this. They're like half gods, right? They're like the sons of a god, and then this mortal woman who herself was a descendant of this Greek hero. So these twins, half god and also like born of a heroic lineage. However, they were left to die by a jealous uncle. This jealous uncle like left them by the river and was going to leave them out to die because he was jealous that they had this famous parentage. However, no worries, they were actually taken in by a wolf, which is why you see this picture right here. This female wolf found these young children, took them in, and nursed them until they were eventually found by a shepherd, who then took them in as his own children and raised them. So Romulus and Remus were raised by this shepherd, and when they got older, they wanted to create a city in the hills of the Tiber River area. The year 753 BCE, which is that's the year that the Roman historians give, which is really funny because that's a very specific year. And like I said, a lot of these stories kind of are the creation of like real history, but also like mythology. And so 753 BCE is the date that Roman historians give for the creation of Rome. But here's the thing. Romulus and Remus couldn't agree on which hill to build Rome. And the argument actually got so heated that Romulus actually killed Remus in that year, 753 BCE, and founded a city and named it after himself. That's why Rome, Romulus, right? He named the city after himself, killed his brother to do so. So Romulus kills Remus, names the city after himself, and starts to create the Roman civilization. Romulus is the leader of this new city. He creates a council of advisors, which later will become known as the Senate. And Romulus and his followers start expanding into nearby territories. And one of the places that they go is an area known as the Sabine region, Sabine. And the way that Romulus and his followers expand into this territory is pretty terrible. They basically threatened war on the Sabine region, and they abducted and married Sabine women. So literally forcing Sabine women into marriages against their will and then raping them in an effort to kind of like conquer that region. And when the Sabine men found out about this, when they discovered that their women were being abducted and raped, the Sabine men threatened war. And this is where the story really starts to reveal a lot about Roman culture and the way that they wanted to portray themselves. The Roman historian said that the Sabine women kind of threw themselves into the middle of all of this and said, no, we don't want a war. Both of you people need to stop. Literally threw themselves in between, their Roman husbands who had abducted them and their Sabine brothers, trying to prevent a family war. Right? That was the Sabine women kind of threw themselves in between their Roman husbands and their Sabine brothers in an effort to, because these women are arguing like, we can't have family killing each other. And they argued that fratricide would lead to disfavor, right? If we had family members killing family members, that the gods would no longer favor us. And so the women kind of like were responsible for keeping the peace. And thus the gods favored the Romans, and the Romans continued to expand. So what is this myth about Romulus and Remus and the Sabine women kind of playing this central role? What does this tell us about Rome? First of all, there's some real problems with this story. One is that Romulus kills Remus. Right? Romulus kills his brother. That's a huge problem. I mean, that is fratricide. It's like the very definition, it's killing your brother. Not to mention the other problem is the kidnapping and raping of these neighboring women, right? This group of people kidnapping and raping their women. There are obviously huge moral flaws in this story. But for the Romans, this foundational myth was actually really important because it has these key traits that the Romans valued. For example, Romulus and Remus were descendants from God. They descended from gods and heroes. And so that's very much a Roman thing, right? Romans portrayed themselves. That all Romans descended from gods and heroes, and thus they were important people. This myth of Romulus and Remus are kind of postulated that Romans can survive in these wild and tough settings, that Romans as a group were tough, rugged people. This myth also illustrated that Romans will defend themselves and will defend their borders at all costs. And setting aside, again, the violence towards the women, the fact that the women play a central role in the founding of Rome and the developing of early Roman culture, this myth portrays women as virtuous and brave, that they got in the middle of this heated, potentially these warring factions, putting themselves at risk to save everybody else. Now, this also illustrates the story of Romulus and Remus and the Sabine women and the whole thing also illustrates what will become one of Rome's greatest achievements, which is that Rome had this ability to bring conquered peoples into its own civilization. Like, Rome could bring people who didn't like Rome and basically convince them to be a part of the Roman civilization. They did this in various ways. Rome often, when it conquered people, would offer citizenship to them. So these Sabine people, for example, when the Sabine people kind of were conquered, Rome would offer many of those Sabine people citizenship, which was very different from what happened in Greek city-states, right? Athenians only offered citizenship to a limited amount of people. Conquered people were not considered citizens. That was if you remember back to that lecture, that was part of the problem with the Delian League, was that the Athenians kind of were condescending to other groups, right? They're like, those other groups are not important. They're not Athens, right? Whereas the Romans kind of extended this olive branch to other groups, and they're like, yeah, we know we just conquered you guys, but if you guys will kind of like bend the knee, so to speak, y'all can be citizens, right? And then we can all just kind of get along. And so Rome gave their citizenship freely. even freed slaves became citizens, right? So, and that happened pretty frequently in Roman society, that slaves would become freed people, and then they would become citizens with voting rights. And so this allowed people to kind of buy into the Roman system. It encouraged loyalty to Rome. But I'm going to give you another example of a myth here in a second. And again, we're going to see violence towards women, and then women playing this like central role in the creational myths of Rome. So we're going to see another myth here, this time involving a woman named Lucretia. So this painting right here is Tarquin and Lucretia, which is by the artist is a man named Titian, who is a early Renaissance painter. So Roman historians said that Romulus founded Rome, but the Etruscans still ruled that area. So Rome as a city was founded, and it kind of controlled its own little kind of area, its own little kingdom. Rome started off as a kingdom, not a republic, but it actually had kings. And the Etruscan kings were the people who kind of ruled that broad area. If you remember back to that map I showed you just a second ago, the Etruscan kings ruled Rome. They were the dominant political force in that area. So the Etruscan kings were the guys who ran things. And this tale of Lucretia is yet again another tale of kind of violence towards women, but also feminine virtue. And we're going to talk about the removal of the Etruscans, how basically the Etruscans came to be removed and the Romans are going to start rising up. Ancient historians often used women, and particularly the possession or loss of women, as a mechanism for talking about political upheaval. So like any sort of, when civilizations rose and fell, when kings would fall, when, it often stemmed from, issues related to men and women, and usually the possession and loss or murder of a woman. Now, this story about Lucretia is not necessarily a myth. It's more like a legend. So it's kind of like a blend of history and a little bit of legend and spicing up the story. And there are actually numerous versions of the tale of Lucretia. The one I'm giving you is kind of one of the more frequent ones, but there are actually various versions written by Roman historians of the tale of Lucretia. So Lucretia was a noblewoman. She was a noblewoman from ancient Rome, known to be a virtuous wife. And what I mean by that is that she had excellent character. She was prudent. People said that she had great purity. She was known to be very, very beautiful. She was married to a guy who was a consul. The consuls were essentially like the guys in charge of the city of Rome. There's usually two of them. So she's married to like one of the guys that's like running the city. So she's a very high-level person in Roman society. Her husband, though, one of the consuls, was away fighting a war, and while he was away at war, the entourage of the Etruscan kings came through Rome. The son of the king, in particular, a man named Tarquin, had been sent to Rome on an errand. And like I said, Lucretia was well known as this pure, beautiful woman. And during the night, Tarquin stole into her room and basically put a dagger to her throat and raped her, essentially. And Lucretia, the next day, summons her father and husband, and I guess her husband came home from the war, and basically told both of them what had happened, along with, there was a whole bunch of other witnesses in the room so that she could kind of make known what the Etruscans had done. Because remember, this was an Etruscan prince that sexually assaulted a Roman noblewoman. And so she summons her father and husband into the room, and along with all these witnesses, and tells them what happened. And then she said, this is a direct quote, she says, a direct quote from a Roman historian. Lucretia says, "Pledge me your solemn word that the adulterer shall not go unpunished." That's what Lucretia said to her husband and her father. "Pledge me your solemn word that the adulterer shall not go unpunished." And then, before anybody could do anything, she took that knife and plunged it into her own heart and died. So rather than live with dishonor, Lucretia stabs herself in the heart and dies. And of course, everybody's shocked. You know, you can see in this picture, this is a picture from the early 1500s by Botticelli. And you can see all these guys right here, just head in hands, like, just, oh God, like, what's happened? And people took that knife and pledged to overthrow the Etruscan kings. So her father and husband basically took a vow of revenge to go and overthrow the Etruscan kings. And this actually, so Lucretia, this story of Lucretia and the assault of Lucretia led to a revolution. And in 509 BCE, that's the date that Roman historians give of the overthrow of the Etruscan kings. And so again, we see here, you know, this a sexual assault of a woman, violence against women as kind of a turning point in Roman history. And the Etruscan kings in 509 were tossed out. And this marks the beginning of the Roman Republic. That's the year that is generally accepted as the beginning of the Roman Republic, is 509 BCE. So we've had two myths so far. We'll talk about a third one here in a minute. We've had two myths so far that give you a great deal of information about the Roman culture just as a culture, right? That, you know, that violence was prevalent, that women play a key role in Roman society, but often are viewed as objects, right? As things to be fought over and died for, and even though in this story, with the story of Lucretia has her own sense of agency by kind of taking her own life, but the idea is that possession or loss of a woman is causing this broader upheaval. So the Romans toss out the Etruscans. The period of the Roman kings was roughly 753 to 509 BCE. Before the Republic, there was a series of Roman kings that ran in the way that all kings do, hereditary rule, right? Like, goes down through the family line. This was the universal governmental system of the time, right? Like, this, almost every single society had a king of some kind. You know, the Athenians were kind of, in some of the Greek city-states were kind of the outliers. The vast majority of civilizations back during this time period had kingdoms, you know, where they were ruled by a monarchy. But roughly in the 6th century BCE, the noble aristocrats, the nobility, kind of rose up, overthrew the hereditary king. Rome transforms into a republic. So what is a republic? You probably heard that word, especially if you've taken any of my American history courses, or just American history over the years. A republic is a governmental system where people have or elect representatives to represent them in politics. A republic is different than a true democracy, right? A true democracy is where literally everybody shows up to vote. That's what happened in Athens, where like all Athenian citizens would show up and would cast a ballot. That's true democracy. Whereas a republic still has democratic elements, right? So the United States has a republic. We don't go vote on pieces of legislation directly, but instead we elect representatives to go and take care of that stuff for us, right? We have politicians who live in Austin or in Washington, D.C., who work on legislation and vote on bills and like these kinds of things. So in the modern day, America is what we call a democratic republic, right? That there's elements of democracy in that citizens can vote on politicians, but ultimately it's our representatives, right? The Senate, the congressmen and women who vote for bills, for legislation. And that's what the Roman Republic was like too. There was a Senate that was elected. There were consuls who were elected. We'll talk about those here in a second. So the Senate is probably the most famous institution from the Roman Republic. The Senate was essentially an assembly of aristocrats. You had to be an aristocrat to be in the Senate, right? You had to be noble to be in the Senate. You couldn't be a commoner, right? A common-born person. So they had the Senate. Rather than a hereditary king, the nobility ran the Senate If you got elected to the Senate, it was a lifetime membership. So often the Senate could have quite a number of old folks in it. And once a person died in the Senate, then they'd have elections to kind of fill that seat. So Senate membership was highly sought after. It was a badge of serious honor to be a member of the Senate. And so the Senate's job is essentially to pass laws, to debate things. They were the legislative body, so to speak, in ancient Rome. The Roman Republic also had these guys known as consuls. The consuls were similar. This is not an exact parallel, but they were similar to what we would have as a president. Right? The consuls were kind of the executive branch, so to speak, in ancient Rome. They held executive power. They were actually elected not by the people, but by the Senate themselves. Right? So the Senate chose the consuls. The consuls would then have seats in the Senate later on. So there was kind of like this system where sometimes they would elect these consuls. Consuls would then join the Senate. You had 2 consuls at a time. And these guys had a lot of power. They controlled military forces. They would go off to war if necessary. And they basically controlled what was going on in the city at any one given time. Consuls changed frequently, though. They only served for 1 year, although you could be reelected, numerous times. Remember earlier, and I'm gonna pause talking about consuls for just a hot second to show you something in this image right here, and that's this thing right here. So this symbol of an axe with like these sticks bound together is actually an Etruscan symbol. I don't remember the name of it, but that's a symbol that the Etruscans used as a symbol of power. And you can see it here being kind of wielded sort of by the consuls as a way of saying like, we are powerful people. That symbol you'll probably see it in other political cartoons as we kind of, or images as we go through this Roman unit. So the Republic lasts from 509 to 264 BCE. 264, and we'll talk very much about the fall of the Roman Republic. Or I'm sorry, it lasts longer than that. We'll talk about the fall of the Roman Republic here a little bit later. During the Republic era, Rome fought numerous wars with its Italian neighbors. Let me show you a picture of kind of where we're situated here. So in the early part of the Roman Republic, Rome was literally just this area right here. So around like 500 BCE, so you can see these colors are showing us what's going on. So Rome is right here, and this deep red is the early part of the Roman Republic, right? So like early years of the Roman Republic, you got this deep red. So it's very small, but gradually Rome expands over time, first kind of along this western seaboard right here, and then eventually to the point where Rome is the dominant culture on the Italian peninsula. But it takes time. The early Roman Republic was very similar to Athens in the sense that their military was based on citizenship. It was, the citizens acted as the soldiers, and it was based on class. If you could afford a horse, then you were part of the cavalry, but most people were infantry, right? Most citizens were infantry soldiers because that's all they could afford. And the way that the Romans secured support from their neighbors, like they would conquer these outlying regions, and the way that they ensured that those people weren't constantly rebelling against Rome was by offering citizenship. That was one method. All right, so they would conquer an area and then give those people citizenship as a way to kind of bring them into the Roman system. Another way that they curried favor with the people they conquered was by sharing the spoils of war. So for example, let's say that Antium, which is right here, which is one of the early areas that Rome conquered. Let's say that Rome and Antium go to war over here, in Arpi, right, in this eastern seaboard. Well, after winning the battle, Rome would share some of the spoils of war, some of the loot with its allies. And what this does is it makes those allies just that much more loyal to Rome. They would share that wealth with the people who helped them fight. Another method and this is in line with that idea, another method of ensuring loyalty was by giving away land. They would conquer these areas and then give away the land to Roman citizens or people who were from other cities, right, that were allies with Rome. So they would kind of help, they would give away land in an effort to try to, again, try to curry favor with the people that they had conquered relatively recently. So all these early wars with these surrounding communities are another source of Roman legend and mythology. And so this time we're going to talk about Cincinnatus, a legendary figure in the history of Rome. So Cincinnatus, the man on the left there, was a former Roman senator. He was not a senator any longer. He had actually been disgraced. He had been expelled from Rome and had been forced to pay this massive fine. Apparently his son, I'm not going to go too deep into detail here, but apparently his son had been responsible for some like violent revolution. And so, and his son had fled. And so they basically made him pay for everything, right? They forced Cincinnatus to take responsibility for his son's actions. So after being expelled from the Senate, Cincinnatus moved outside the city and had this private farm that he basically just became a farmer, just living a simple life out in the rural areas. But then a neighboring civilization was threatening Rome. Oh my God, right? So and it was a serious problem. The consuls were out at war, their armies were surrounded, and it looked like Rome might lose a major war that was going on. And for some reason, people figured that Cincinnatus might have the answers. And so the Senate actually sent some envoys, sent some like diplomats to go talk to Cincinnatus. And so they show up at his farm, and they're like, "Dude, we need your help, man. Like, you got to come back to Rome and like help us figure all this out." They urged him to come back and assume the role of dictator. Now, in our modern language, the term dictator has a lot of negative connotations, right? It means this guy who rules by fear and oppression, and it's like a single ruler, right? And what he says goes. But usually there's this, the connotation is that of dictator in our modern language is someone who rules by fear or oppression and is harsh towards the people he's ruling. Whereas in the Roman language, in Latin, dictator was just simply a person who ruled without anybody, a politician who had ultimate power. It didn't necessarily mean an angry or mean ruler. So occasionally in Roman history, the Senate would appoint a dictator to kind of handle moments of crisis. And that's what was going on here with Cincinnatus, is that there was this crisis going on, and they needed help, and they felt Cincinnatus was the guy. And so you can see, I love this picture, because Cincinnatus is just on his farm. He's got his hand on his plow, and he's just like listening to these dudes like, yeah. And then he's like, sure, I'll come be the dictator for a bit. So Cincinnatus goes back to Rome, assumes the role of dictator, and, agrees to help Rome, and amazingly is able to help Rome through this military crisis, win this war. And here's the key moment, is that after Cincinnatus has helped them win, and Cincinnatus has, he's the dictator, the guy with the ultimate power, he gives up that power, right? So Cincinnatus gives up that power, and you can see he's giving up there's that axe with the bundle of sticks wrapped around it. And that's that symbol of power. And Cincinnatus willingly gives up that power and goes back to farming on his farm, returning to that simple life. And so the moral of this story, right, this is, again, another one of those legends with a moral behind it. And so this is the story of a selfless leader, right? A guy who is called into action at the last minute, and he's asked to do something amazing. He's asked to save the city, and he does it. He does all these selfless acts. He agrees to give up his simple life on the farm, and then when he's done with that, after he has gained all this power, he willingly gives it up. Very similar to what George Washington will do in 1796 with the United States. We'll talk about that later. But so this is the story of a selfless leader who does the right thing at every step of the way, right? He despite the fact that he had been kind of shamed and expelled from the Senate, he still went back and helped Rome through a crisis, and then gave up that power after he had done his duty. An honorable story. However, Roman society was plagued by social problems throughout many portions of its history. Roman society was very divided along class lines. There was two rough groups in Roman society. You had the patricians, who were the land-holding upper class. They were the aristocracy, essentially. People of means, people with money, people that owned almost all the land. The patricians had a privileged legal status right from birth. They held all the political power. They were the only people in the early years of the Roman Republic who could serve in the Senate. And so patricians basically dominated Roman society. Plebeians, on the other hand, the people at the bottom of that pyramid, these are your more simple folk: farmers, merchants, artisans, traders, urban dwellers who don't own any land. These people, the plebeians, had a voice in politics, right? They were citizens. These were free people, but they had none of the social advantages of the patrician class. So there's this class structure where the plebeians are more numerous, and the plebeians form most of the military, but they don't have the power of the patrician class. And that's going to lead to problems. In the early Roman Republic, the plebeians could not hold political office. Only patricians could hold political office. And the way that Roman society was structured, since patricians were the only people in the Senate, they could outvote the plebeians pretty much all the time, because the patricians were the people who ran the politics. And so this inequality is going to breed contempt and discontentment, right? The plebeians are going to start thinking like, hey, we contribute to society too. Why are you guys the ones that have all the power? And so this is going to lead to an event called the struggle of the orders. The orders meaning the patricians versus the plebeians. The plebeians are angry. They have very little political power, despite the fact that they're more numerous and the fact that they make up the majority of the military. So there's this anger amongst the plebeians, and they want to gain political equality with the patricians. So in 494 BCE, there is this revolt amongst the plebeians. The plebeians essentially just walk out of Rome. They're like, dude, we're out of here. You want us to serve in your military? We're not going to do it. See you later. And so they literally, in a modern term, they go on strike, right? The plebeians go on strike. They just refuse to serve in the military anymore, which is a big deal, right? Because Rome is surrounded by enemies, and Rome is constantly at war with the surrounding civilizations, and it needs the plebeians to fight those wars. And so when the plebeians are just like, dude, we're out of here. We're going on strike. See you later. Have fun, fighting your wars with no army. Right, this is a serious problem for the patrician class. And so, what the plebeians are trying to gain here is legal and political equality. Up to this point, patricians were the only ones who could serve in the Senate. They were the only ones who could argue cases in the courts. They were the only ones who knew how to interpret the laws, that those were things that were kept away from the plebeians. And so the plebeians are trying to kind of gain legal and political equality, and they're doing so by going on strike. And it actually works. It actually works. After this struggle, the patricians kind of cave and give in to many of the plebeian demands. After the struggle of the orders, plebeians are going to be able to elect their own officials. They create this thing called the plebeian assembly, which is kind of like the plebeian version of the Senate. And this had real power. This wasn't just like a token to the plebeians. The plebeian assembly had real legitimate power. They could actually stop Senate debates. They could veto decisions that were made by the consuls. And remember, those are the guys who have executive power. So the plebeian assembly, as a result of this struggle, actually gets the plebeians real legitimate power. And over time, plebeians are able to actually join the Senate. There will be plebeian consuls later on that will run Rome. Now they'll still be kind of talked down to behind their back, right, there will still be aristocrats who don't like the fact that plebeians are running the show sometimes, right? So there's still a lot of that class disharmony going on here, and the class structure still remains. Patricians and plebeians are still going to that structure of the orders is still going to be around. But this struggle for the orders does gain the plebeians some real, honest-to-goodness equality, or at the very least, a good deal of political power. Now, political power is still going to be concentrated amongst the wealthy elite, but the plebeians at least now have a significant chunk of that power. They at least have a voice. Over time, numerous problems develop in the Roman Republic. Over time, the Roman Republic starts conquering various parts of the Mediterranean. Its eyes extend beyond just the Italian peninsula, and over time, Rome will conquer other parts of the Mediterranean. Now, we're going to talk about Roman conquest in a future lecture, so I don't want to talk about it too much today because that's a different topic for a different time. But just know that Rome is conquering more and more territory. And this makes things complicated, right? Because the more territory you conquer, the more you need administrative systems, you need more tax collectors, you need more governmental bureaucracies, your army gets bigger, which means not only do you need more soldiers, but you need more military leaders. And so over time, the conquering of more territory, like, yes, it makes Rome more powerful, and yes, it brings in more money for Rome, but it also causes problems. And one of those problems is that the Roman generals who are fighting these wars and winning these victories and conquering these other areas, they become politically powerful. Roman military figures actually become quite powerful politically. Because the thing is, ordinary citizens, right, just regular Roman citizens, people not just in Rome but other places, who are fighting in the Roman military, they support those generals, right? They fight under them and thus become loyal to the military leadership. Oftentimes, the common people, the plebeians and the common folk, viewed the Senate, right? And the Senate was led by the patricians, right, by those aristocrats. They viewed the Senate as unresponsive, as, uncaring about the problems that afflicted the lower classes. And so that was my dog that just made that yawn right there. So Roman generals, Roman military brass become quite politically powerful, and they're supported by the lower classes. Another problem that's afflicting the Roman Republic is wealth disparity. There is a few wealthy people at the top of Roman society, and then a whole bunch of not wealthy people at the bottom. The spoils of war seem to kind of always go up to those upper classes. Average soldiers seem to gain very little from these conquests. Another problem is overpopulation. Rome and the cities around Rome are getting crowded, and it's really a problem to have big cities with a lot of urban poor, because that's just an explosive situation that can lead to revolts. And so there was this, like, near the end of the Roman Republic, there's this kind of sense that society was a tinderbox, right? That it was ready to explode, that there were all these problems that were kind of building and building. And the late Roman Republic period is marked by a lot of rebellions and power struggles and political chaos. And it's within this kind of context that we need to talk about probably the most famous man in the era of the Roman Republic, and that's Julius Caesar. So who is Julius Caesar? He's one of the men who's at the center of these power struggles. Julius Caesar had been born into a noble family, so he was from that patrician class. He was well educated. He was a serious intellectual. Like, his writings are, used to be read as classics in Western literature. He was a superb public speaker, a great politician, and he was very, very ambitious. A very ambitious man, not just militarily, but politically as well. So he was one of those guys who not only was a great military mind, but then would use his popularity with his soldiers and with the general public as a way to gain political power. So roughly around 60 BCE, Rome is putting down rebellions all over the place. I'm going to show you kind of an image here. This is the Roman Empire, or the Roman Empire during the late Republican period. And you can see that Rome has extended far beyond the early city of Rome right here in Italy, all the way over into what is called Gaul, which is modern-day France and Germany, down into Spain, into northern Africa and Egypt, and then all the way through Greece and over into modern-day Turkey, what people call Asia Minor. So, the Roman Empire is massive, being run by a republic, and the way that they structured this, and I'm not going to go too deep into detail here, but they essentially had military leaders who were responsible for controlling various sections of the Roman Empire. So Julius Caesar was responsible for controlling this area up here known as Gaul. That was Julius Caesar's area. And so roughly around 60 BCE, Julius Caesar putting down various rebellions. He had at one point been over here in Spain and put a rebellion down there. And he returned to Rome with a couple of other fellow military generals. And I'll show you here. So Julius Caesar returns to Rome with a couple of other military leaders, and they form this kind of pact that becomes known as the First Triumvirate. Triumvirate because there's three of them. And they basically form a sort of military leadership that is going to dominate Rome. They essentially make themselves governors of various areas surrounding Rome. That's where Caesar gets to control Gaul. So let me flip back here. So after they form this thing called the First Triumvirate, Caesar is put in charge of this area known as Gaul, and then I don't remember what the other military leaders' names are, but one was controlling this eastern area, and then one controlled Spain. And so Caesar's in charge of Gaul. He's in charge of kind of putting down any rebellions that are happening out there, and you can see that they do. 58, 52, 57, 53, they're out there fighting quite a bit. Over time, that alliance between Julius Caesar and the other two military leaders deteriorates. One of the military leaders, whose name was Crassus, dies in a battle. So now it's just two guys left, Julius Caesar and another guy named Pompey. And they start kind of arguing with each other. Julius Caesar and Pompey start viewing each other as enemies rather than allies. They start to believe that the other person is out to get them, trying to cut them out of leadership roles. They start accusing each other of treachery. And so in 49 BCE, which you can see right here, this little marker, Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon River with his army. Caesar was supposed to stay out here. So when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, that was a symbol, right? That Caesar was coming to Rome, and he was bringing his army with him, right? That was very much a message, like, I'm coming to take power, essentially. And even in the modern day, you may have heard that term before, crossing the Rubicon has become kind of a catchphrase for taking an irreversible course of action, right? So if you're making a big decision and you've taken that final step that puts you on the path towards that big decision, someone might say you've crossed the Rubicon, right? Like, now you're there, like you're heading that way, and there's nothing that can stop you. That you're on an irreversible course. And so when Caesar crossed that Rubicon, he was on an irreversible course going to Rome, and he was going to try to take power. And in fact, he does. When Julius Caesar reaches Rome, he forces Pompey out. As you can see, Pompey has to, these green and blue arrows indicate the civil war campaigns. Caesar forces Pompey out. Pompey flees and goes to Egypt. Caesar's going to follow him. What's interesting about Egypt is that Egypt is still ruled by that old Hellenistic kingdom, that the Ptolemaic kings are still running Egypt at this point. And so Egypt was controlled by a brother-sister duo. The king was King Ptolemy the 13th, But the queen is somebody you've probably heard of, Cleopatra. So Ptolemy sides with Pompey. Pompey arrives in Egypt, and Ptolemy's like, we got your back. Cleopatra sides with Julius Caesar. So when Julius Caesar get there with his army, he and Cleopatra form an alliance, and they win the war. Caesar and Cleopatra win the war. Pompey is assassinated in 48 BC, and Caesar returns to Rome victorious. He actually brings Cleopatra with him back to Rome, and Caesar is wildly popular. When he gets back to Rome, he gets elected to a position as consul. Then eventually, because of some various crises, he will become a dictator, very similar to what happens with Cincinnatus. Eventually, he is given the title of imperator, which is essentially the Roman word for emperor. And Caesar is going to try to basically establish himself as a dictator for life. And he was wildly popular, especially with the common folks. Remember, this was a military leader, a guy who'd conquered other civilizations, who'd won multiple military victories. And so he was very, very popular. But other politicians were jealous of his popularity. Other politicians didn't trust him. Other politicians didn't like that Julius Caesar was undermining the Republic in many ways, because Julius Caesar was gaining so much power that he was able to ignore the Senate in some ways. And there were a lot of old school politicians who were uncomfortable with that, who believed that the Senate should be what runs the Roman Republic, not a dictator or an emperor. And so a couple of senators, Brutus and Cassius, want to return to the old ways, right? To where the Senate ran things, to the ideals of the Republic. They distrusted Julius Caesar's power grabs, and they made a plot to assassinate Julius Caesar. And on March 15th in 49 BCE, on his way to the Roman Senate, Julius Caesar is stabbed to death by a number of his fellow senators. This is where the famous Shakespearean line, et tu, Brute, which means, and you too, Brutus, as Brutus stabs Julius Caesar. And he dies in 49 BCE. This is a pivotal moment for the Roman Republic, because you have senators who openly plotted against a very popular political leader. They kill him on the steps of the Senate, and eventually the guy who's going to take over in Julius Caesar's stead is a guy named Octavian. Octavian, who's this guy right here, will eventually kind of consolidate power, and over the course of a number of years, Octavian will drive out his political enemies, and in 27 BCE, Octavian will be given the name Augustus by the Senate, which Augustus means the revered one. And so, after the death of Julius Caesar, Octavian assumes the leadership role and is going to eventually become Rome's first emperor, basically ending the Roman Republic. Roman historians use the year 27 BCE, the year that Octavian is given the title Augustus, as the end of the Roman Republic, because that title, the revered one, is like saying, you're the guy. Even though the Senate probably didn't mean to, they irreversibly changed the course of Roman history by kind of creating an emperor. So in 27 BCE, the Roman Republic ends, and the Roman Empire, the imperial Rome, where you have an emperor, begins. So in the next lecture, we're going to talk about how Rome expanded. We're going to talk about the empire of Rome, some of the military conquests of Rome. We're going to talk about Octavian and some of the other emperors. There are a lot of colorful figures in the history of the Roman Empire. And so we'll talk about how the Roman Empire was built, and also how the Roman Empire differed from the Roman Republic. So I hope you guys join me for that one. I'll see you guys next time. Y'all take care.